The courtroom was quiet except for the sound of shuffling papers and the occasional cough. It wasn't a big courthouse, just one of those old buildings in downtown Chicago that had seen better days. The walls were lined with dark wood panels, and the air smelled faintly of dust and polish. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the room. Everyone there seemed to be waiting for something important to happen, but no one looked particularly happy about it. At Tio, the center of it all, stood Ethan Carter. He was only 17 years old, but today he felt much older. His heart pounded so hard that he could hear it in his ears, even over the muffled whispers coming from the benches behind him. Ethan's hands were clashed together so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He kept his gaze fixed on the floor, trying not to meet anyone's eyes. If he did, he might lose what little courage he had left. Ethan's mom, Laura, sat in the front row of the gallery. She was gripping her purse like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Her blonde hair fell just below her shoulders, and she wore a simple sweater that made her look more tired than usual. Every now and then, she glanced up at Ethan, her lips pressed into a thin line. She wanted to say something encouraging, but she knew this wasn't the time or place. Instead, she just prayed silently, hoping against hope that things would turn out okay. On the other side of the room, the prosecutor flipped through his notes confidently. He was a tall man with sharp features and a voice that carried authority. Beside him sat a stack of files filled with evidence, emails, screenshots, witness statements, all pointing to Ethan as the culprit, or so they claimed. And then there was Judge Robert Caldwell. He sat high up on the bench, towering over everyone else in the room. His black robe draped heavily around him, making him seem larger than life. His gray hair was neatly combed back, and his glasses perched precariously on the edge of his nose. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the desk in front of him. His expression was unreadable, but the way his jaw tightened told everyone present that he wasn't in a good mood. Judge Caldwell had been on the bench for nearly 30 years, and he prided himself on being tough but fair. Over time, though, tough had started to overshadow fair. People often described him as intimidating, even cruel. And today, he seemed especially irritated. Maybe it was because the case before him involved yet another teenager accused of doing something stupid. Or maybe it was because he'd already heard too many excuses from kids who thought they were smarter than the system. Either way, Ethan was about to feel the full force of the judge's displeasure. "Mr. Carter," Judge Caldwell began, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife, "do you understand why you're here today?" Ethan swallowed hard. He nodded once, still looking at the floor. "Yes, Your Honor," he said softly. The judge narrowed his eyes. "Speak up, young man. I can't hear you." "Yes, Your Honor," Ethan repeated louder this time. His voice trembled slightly, but he managed to keep it steady enough. "Well?" Judge Caldwell prompted. "Explain yourself. What possessed you to hack into the city's transportation system? Do you have any idea how serious that is?" Ethan hesitated. He didn't know where to start. How could he explain that it hadn't been malicious, that it had started as a harmless prank, a challenge between friends and spiraled out of control, that he never meant for anyone to get hurt? I didn't mean to cause trouble," Ethan finally stammered. "It was supposed to be a joke." "A joke?" Judge Caldwell interrupted, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Oh yes, because nothing says funny like tampering with public infrastructure. Did you think about the chaos you could have caused? The accidents? The lives at risk?" Ethan flinched. He hadn't thought about any of that, at least not until after everything went wrong. Now, every word the judge said felt like a weight, pressing down on him. He opened his mouth to respond, but the judge wasn't done. "Young people these days," Judge Caldwell continued, shaking his head, "always thinking you're invincible, always convinced you're smarter than everyone else. Well, let me tell you something, Mr. Carter. Jail isn't just for adults. We have plenty of space for delinquents like you." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He felt his cheeks burn with shame, but he forced himself to stay calm. Losing his temper wouldn't help anything. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't fair. Sure, he'd made a mistake, but did it really deserve this kind of treatment? Laura shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She hated seeing her son treated this way. Ethan wasn't perfect, but he wasn't a criminal either. He was just a kid who sometimes got carried away with his curiosity. She wished she could stand up and defend him, but she knew it wouldn't do any good. All she could do was sit there and watch, clinging to the hope that someone would see past the accusations and recognize the intelligent, kind-hearted boy she knew. Meanwhile, the prosecutor cleared his throat, ready to present his case. "Your Honor," he began, standing up and adjusting his tie. "As you'll see from the evidence, the defendant knowingly accessed restricted systems without authorization. Not only does this violate multiple laws, but it also puts public safety at risk. We're asking for the maximum penalty to send a clear message that such behavior will not be tolerated." Judge Caldwell nodded approvingly. "Proceed." As the prosecutor laid out the details of the case, Ethan tuned out most of it. He'd already heard it all before, during questioning, during interviews, during sleepless nights when guilt gnawed at him relentlessly. But one thing caught his attention. The prosecutor mentioned a cybersecurity firm that had conducted unauthorized tests on the same system around the same time. Could that be relevant? Ethan filed the information away in the back of his mind, unsure if it would matter. When it was finally Ethan's turn to speak, he took a deep breath. This was his chance to explain, to defend himself, to show that he wasn't just some reckless teenager. Slowly, he raised his head and looked directly at Judge Caldwell. For the first time that day, his blue eyes met the judge's steely gaze. "Your Honor," Ethan said, his voice steadier now. "If I may, I'd like to address the court directly." Judge Caldwell raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "Very well. Make it quick." What happened next surprised everyone, including Ethan himself. Ethan took another deep breath before he began to speak. His voice was steady now, almost too calm for someone his age facing such serious charges. He glanced briefly at his mom, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. Then, turning back to Judge Caldwell, Ethan started explaining himself. "Your Honor," Ethan said, "I understand that what I did was wrong, and I regret it deeply, but I also want to clarify some important points about this case." He paused for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Everyone in the courtroom was watching him closely, some with curiosity, others with suspicion. Even the prosecutor stopped shuffling his papers to listen. "The prosecution claims that I hacked into the city's transportation system intentionally and recklessly," Ethan continued. "But if you examine the evidence carefully, you'll see inconsistencies in their argument." At this, Judge Caldwell raised an eyebrow. "Inconsistencies?" he repeated, his tone skeptical. "Are you saying the prosecution made mistakes?" "Yes, Your Honor," Ethan replied without hesitation. "For example, they've accused me of causing disruptions to the system on the night of October 15th. However, according to my research, there were unauthorized tests conducted by a cybersecurity firm on the same system during that exact time frame." The prosecutor frowned and quickly flipped through his notes, searching for something to counter Ethan's claim. Judge Caldwell leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. "And how do you know about these tests?" he asked sharply. Ethan hesitated for just a second before answering. "I read about them in publicly available reports filed by the firm itself. They admitted to conducting tests without proper authorization, which raises questions about whether the disruptions were caused by me or by their actions." This revelation sent ripples through the courtroom. Lawyers whispered among themselves, exchanging glances. Laura sat frozen in her seat, her eyes wide with disbelief. She had no idea her son knew so much about legal procedures, or had the confidence to bring them up in court. Judge Caldwell rubbed his temples, clearly annoyed. "Even if that's true," he said gruffly, "it doesn't excuse your own illegal activities. You still accessed restricted systems without permission." "You're right, Your Honor," Ethan agreed, surprising everyone with his honesty. "What I did was wrong, and I take full responsibility for my actions. But under the law, intent matters. If I can prove that the disruptions weren't caused by me and that I didn't act with malicious intent, then the charges should be reconsidered. The judge stared at Ethan for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sighed heavily. "Fine," he said. "Let's hear more of your so-called proof." "Go ahead." Ethan nodded and pulled out a folder from his bag. Inside were neatly organized notes, screenshots, and printouts of emails between city officials and the cybersecurity firm. He handed the folder to the bailiff, who passed it up to the judge. "As you can see, Your Honor," Ethan explained, pointing to specific sections of the documents, the firm admitted to running unauthorized tests on the system around midnight on October 15th, the same time frame mentioned in the charges against me. Additionally, they acknowledged causing temporary glitches as part of their testing process. The prosecutor stepped forward, looking visibly uncomfortable. "Your Honor," he interjected, "these documents are irrelevant. Regardless of what the firm did, the defendant still committed a crime by accessing the system unlawfully." "That's not entirely accurate," Ethan countered calmly. "Under Section 431 of the Illinois Computer Crime Prevention Law, unauthorized access must result in actual harm to qualify as a felony. Since the disruptions were caused by the firm, not me, there's no evidence of harm directly linked to my actions." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. People leaned forward in their seats, eager to hear more. Even the bailiff looked impressed, glancing at Ethan with newfound respect. Judge Caldwell pinched the bridge of his nose, clearly frustrated. "Where did you learn all this?" he demanded, his voice tinged with both irritation and curiosity. "Books," Ethan replied simply, "and online resources. I've always been interested in understanding laws and how they work." Laura couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her son sounded like a seasoned attorney, not a nervous teenager facing criminal charges. She felt a surge of pride mixed with relief, though she knew the battle wasn't over yet. The prosecutor tried to regain control of the situation. "Your Honor," he said firmly, "regardless of the technicalities, we have clear evidence that the defendant accessed the system illegally. That alone is enough to convict him." Ethan turned to face the prosecutor, his expression unshaken. "Actually, Your Honor," he said, addressing the judge again, "there's one more thing I'd like to point out. The login credentials used to access the system weren't mine. They belonged to a former employee of the city's IT department. Someone else framed me by using those credentials." Now the entire courtroom erupted into murmurs. The prosecutor's face turned red as he scrambled to find a response. Judge Caldwell slammed his gavel down hard, demanding silence. "This is highly irregular," the judge growled, glaring at Ethan. "Do you have any evidence to support this claim?" "I do, Your Honor," Ethan replied confidently. From his folder, he produced a printed email chain showing correspondence between the IT department and the cybersecurity firm. One email revealed that the stolen credentials had been leaked months earlier, and that the firm had failed to notify the city about the breach. The prosecutor looked pale as he reviewed the documents. For the first time, he seemed unsure of himself, fumbling through his notes and avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. Judge Caldwell studied the papers in front of him, his expression darkening. After several tense minutes, he leaned forward and addressed Ethan directly. "Young man," he said slowly, "you seem to know more about this case than anyone else in this room, including the lawyers. Are you telling me you prepared all this yourself?" "Yes, Your Honor," Ethan answered honestly. "I wanted to make sure I understood the facts before coming here today." The judge shook his head, muttering something under his breath. Then, with a heavy sigh, he turned to the prosecutor. "It seems we have a lot to discuss," he said sternly. "Court is adjourned until further notice." As the gavel came down, the courtroom buzzed with excitement. Reporters rushed toward Ethan, peppering him with questions. Laura stood up, tears streaming down her face as she hugged her son tightly. "You did it," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I'm so proud of you." Ethan smiled weakly, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. He hadn't won yet, not officially, but he had planted seeds of doubt strong enough to challenge the prosecution's case. And for the first time since Ihoy, this nightmare began, he allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed as reporters shouted questions at Ethan and his mom. Despite the chaos, Ethan kept his composure, answering politely but briefly. He knew the fight wasn't over, but for now, he had proven that he wasn't just another reckless teenager. He was smart, resourceful, and determined to clear his name. They walked away from the courthouse. Laura squeezed Ethan's hand tightly. "Whatever happens next," she said softly, "we'll face it together." Ethan nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: he wasn't going down without a fight. The days following the first hearing were a whirlwind of activity for Ethan Carter and his family. News of the teenager's unexpected courtroom performance spread quickly, sparking debates across Chicago. Some people praised Ethan for standing up for himself and exposing flaws in the city's cybersecurity measures. Others criticized him for taking matters into his own hands, regardless of his intentions. Reporters camped outside their modest home, hoping to catch a glimpse of the teen legal prodigy, as one newspaper headline called him. Despite the chaos, Ethan tried to stay focused. He spent hours each day reviewing case files, researching laws, and preparing additional evidence to strengthen his defense. His room, once cluttered with school books and computer parts, now resembled a makeshift office, filled with stacks of printed emails, legal statutes, and handwritten notes. Laura, his mom, did everything she could to support him, bringing meals to his desk, answering phone calls from reporters, and reminding him to take breaks. One evening, as Ethan sat cross-legged, on the floor surrounded by papers, Laura walked in carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate. She placed one gently beside him and sat down, wrapping her arms around her knees. "You're doing amazing, Ethan," she said softly. "I just want you to know how proud I am." Ethan looked up, surprised. "Thanks, Mom," he replied, managing a small smile. "But it's not over yet. There's still a lot we don't know." Laura nodded, her gaze drifting to the piles of documents scattered around the room. "Do you think they'll drop the charges?" "I hope so," Ethan admitted. "But even if they don't, I've got more evidence to show them. They can't ignore the truth forever." His confidence reassured her, though she couldn't shake the worry gnawing at the back of her mind. What if none of this worked? What if the system refused to listen? Meanwhile, Judge Robert Caldwell found himself unable to stop thinking about Ethan. After decades on the bench, he thought he'd seen it all: every excuse, every sob story, every desperate attempt to avoid responsibility. But Ethan was different. The boy had come prepared, armed with knowledge most adults didn't possess. And instead of lashing out or breaking down under pressure, he had remained composed and respectful. That night, Judge Caldwell sat alone in his study, staring at the stack of documents Ethan had submitted during the hearing. Each page was meticulously organized, every argument backed by solid evidence. It wasn't just impressive, it was extraordinary. For the first time in years, the judge felt genuinely intrigued by a case. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in months. "Hello?" A voice answered on the other end. "It's Caldwell," the judge said gruffly. "I need your help with something." The next morning, Ethan and Laura arrived at the courthouse early. A crowd had already gathered outside, eager to see what would happen next. As they made their way inside, Ethan noticed the prosecutor pacing near the entrance, muttering to himself. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes betraying sleepless nights. When the hearing began, Judge Caldwell wasted no time getting to the point. "Before we proceed," he announced, addressing the courtroom, "I've reviewed the additional evidence presented by the defense. Furthermore, I consulted with independent experts who confirmed that the disruptions in question were likely caused by the unauthorized tests conducted by the cybersecurity firm, not the defendant." A murmur rippled through the room. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably, his face pale. Laura gripped Ethan's hand tightly, her heart racing. "However," the judge continued, raising his voice slightly to silence the murmurs, "the fact remains that Mr. Carter accessed restricted systems without authorization. While intent and causation are critical factors, the law is clear. Unauthorized access is illegal. Ethan swallowed hard, bracing himself for the worst. Had all his efforts been for nothing? But, Judge Caldwell added, leaning forward and fixing his gaze on Ethan, given the circumstances and considering the lack of direct harm caused by Mr. Carter's actions, I'm inclined to dismiss the felony charges. Instead, I propose a reduced charge of misdemeanor trespassing, along with mandatory community service. The prosecutor opened his mouth to protest, but Judge Caldwell cut him off with a sharp glare. Does anyone object? No one spoke. The prosecutor sighed heavily and sank back into his chair, defeated. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Beside him, Laura burst into tears, burying her face in her hands. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to cry, not out of fear but out of relief. After the hearing ended, reporters swarmed Ethan and his mom as they left the courthouse. Cameras flashed and microphones were thrust toward them, but Ethan kept his answers brief. I'm grateful for the outcome, he told them, and I hope this brings attention to the importance of securing public systems. Later that afternoon, Laura received a call from an unexpected source, Judge Caldwell's office. The judge wanted to meet with Ethan privately. Confused but curious, she agreed to arrange it. 2 days later, Ethan and Laura arrived at the judge's chambers. The room was spacious and formal, with shelves lined with law books and framed certificates hanging on the walls. Judge Caldwell greeted them warmly, which was unusual for someone known for his stern demeanor. Please sit down, he said, gesturing to the chairs in front of his desk. Once they were settled, he turned to Ethan, his expression thoughtful. Mr. Carter, he began, I must admit you've impressed me. Not many people, let alone teenagers, would have the courage or intelligence to handle themselves the way you did in court. Ethan blinked, unsure how to respond. Thank you, Your Honor, he said finally. I'll be honest, the judge continued. I went into that hearing expecting another typical juvenile delinquency case. But you proved me wrong. You reminded me why I became a judge in the first place, to seek justice, not just punishment. Laura smiled faintly, touched by the judge's words. Ethan nodded, feeling a mix of pride and humility. So here's my offer, Judge Caldwell said, leaning back in his chair. If you're interested, I'd like to mentor you. Informally, of course. Teach you about the law, courtroom strategy, and maybe even help you channel that passion of yours into something meaningful. Ethan's eyes widened in surprise. Really? He asked, barely able to contain his excitement. Yes, the judge replied with a rare smile. You've got potential, son. Don't waste it. Laura reached over and squeezed Ethan's hand, tears welling up in her eyes again. This time, they were tears of joy. Over the next few months, Ethan and Judge Caldwell met regularly. Their sessions started awkwardly, with Ethan hesitant to speak too much and the judge struggling to soften his gruff exterior. But as they worked together, a bond began to form. Judge Caldwell taught Ethan about the intricacies of the legal system, sharing stories from his own career and offering advice on how to navigate challenging situations. In return, Ethan introduced the judge to modern technology and innovative ways of thinking, helping him see the world through younger eyes. Through their partnership, both men changed in subtle but profound ways. Ethan gained invaluable guidance and confidence while Judge Caldwell rediscovered his passion for fairness and justice. Together, they proved that sometimes the most unlikely relationships can lead to the greatest growth. As winter turned to spring, Ethan found himself looking forward to the future, not with fear but with hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he wouldn't face them alone. Ethan's life began to change in ways he never imagined after Judge Caldwell offered to mentor him. At first, Ethan wasn't sure what to expect. He knew the judge was strict and intimidating, but during their meetings, he saw a different side of the man, a softer, more thoughtful side that cared deeply about fairness and justice. Each session became a learning experience, not just about the law, but about life itself. Their weekly meetings took place in the judge's chambers, a quiet space where they could talk without interruptions. The room smelled of old books and polished wood, and its walls were lined with shelves stacked high with legal texts and framed awards. Despite its formal appearance, the atmosphere grew less tense over time, thanks to their growing friendship. "You've got a good head on your shoulders," Judge Caldwell said one afternoon, leaning back in his chair. "But knowledge alone won't make you great. You need to learn how to read people, understand their motives, their fears, their weaknesses." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "I guess I didn't think about that before. I was so focused on the facts that I forgot people aren't always logical." The judge chuckled. "Exactly. Laws are written by humans, enforced by humans, and interpreted by humans. Emotions play a big role, whether we like it or not." As the weeks passed, Ethan soaked up every word the judge said. He learned about courtroom strategies, negotiation tactics, and the importance of preparation. But perhaps the most valuable lesson came when Judge Caldwell shared personal stories from his own career. "Early on," the judge recalled, "I thought being tough meant winning every case. It took me years to realize that true justice isn't about victories. It's about doing what's right even when it's hard." Ethan listened intently, absorbing the wisdom behind the judge's words. These conversations gave him a deeper appreciation for the complexities of the legal system and for the man sitting across from him. While Ethan worked closely with Judge Caldwell, Laura noticed a transformation in her son. Gone was the nervous teenager who struggled to find his place in the world. In his place stood a confident young man with a clear sense of purpose. She often found him reading law books late into the night or typing away on his laptop, researching cases and drafting essays about legal reform. One evening, as Ethan sat at the kitchen table surrounded by notes, Laura placed a cup of tea beside him. "You're working too hard," she teased gently. "Even superheroes need breaks." Ethan grinned, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. "I'm not a superhero, Mom, just someone trying to make things better." "Well, you're doing an amazing job," she replied, her voice filled with pride. "Have you thought about what you'll do next?" Ethan paused, considering the question. "I want to study law," he admitted. "Maybe become a lawyer someday, or even a judge like Judge Caldwell." Laura smiled warmly. "I think you'd be perfect for it. You've already proven you can handle anything they throw at you." Her encouragement meant the world to Ethan. For so long he had doubted himself, wondering if he was smart enough or strong enough to succeed. But now, with his mom's unwavering support and Judge Caldwell's guidance, he felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Judge Caldwell also underwent a subtle but significant change during this time. Mentoring Ethan reminded him of why he had chosen a career in law in the first place. Over the years he had grown cynical, hardened by the countless cases he presided over. But Ethan's enthusiasm and determination reignited something inside him. A belief that justice could still be achieved, one step at a time. One day, as they wrapped up another session, Judge Caldwell looked at Ethan with a rare smile. "You know, I used to think teenagers like you were troublemakers, but meeting you has made me realize how wrong I was." Ethan laughed nervously. "Well, I did cause some trouble." "Yes, but look at what came out of it," the judge countered. "You exposed flaws in the system, inspired others to take action, and proved that age doesn't define ability. That's something to be proud of." Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. "Thank you, Your Honor. I couldn't have done any of this without your help." The judge waved off the compliment. "Nonsense, you earned every bit of it yourself. I'm just glad I got to witness it." As months turned into years, Ethan's reputation continued to grow. His story inspired articles, interviews, and even a documentary highlighting the importance of cybersecurity awareness. Schools invited him to speak at assemblies, encouraging students to pursue their passions while staying mindful of the consequences of their actions. Despite the attention, Ethan remained humble. He credited his success to his mom, Judge Caldwell, and the lessons he had learned along the way. Most importantly, he stayed true to his goal, using his skills to make the world a better place. When it came time to apply for college, Ethan chose a prestigious law school known for its focus on public service. Acceptance letters poured in, and when he received the official notification that he'd been awarded a full scholarship, he ran straight to his mom to share the news. "We did it, Mom," he said, hugging her tightly. "All those late nights paid off." Laura hugged him back, tears streaming down her face. "This is just the beginning, Ethan. Imagine all the good you'll do." On the day of Ethan's swearing-in ceremony as a practicing attorney years later, Judge Caldwell attended proudly. Now retired, the judge walked with a slight limp, but his presence commanded respect as always. As Ethan stood before the crowd, raising his hand to take the oath, he glanced at the audience and locked eyes with the judge. In that moment, both men reflected on how far they had come. What started as mockery in a courtroom had blossomed into mutual respect and a shared mission to seek justice. Neither would forget the journey that brought them here, or the bond they had formed along the way. After the ceremony, Judge Caldwell approached Ethan and his mom, shaking Ethan's hand firmly. "Congratulations, counselor," he said with a grin. "The world is lucky to have you." "Thank you, Your Honor," Ethan replied, his voice steady but emotional. "None of this would have been possible without you." Laura stepped forward, wrapping her arms around the judge in a heartfelt hug. "Thank you for believing in him," she whispered. The judge patted her shoulder awkwardly, but smiled nonetheless. "It was my pleasure." As they parted ways, Ethan looked back at the courthouse steps, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. He had faced adversity, overcome doubt, and emerged stronger because of it. And though the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, he knew he was ready to tackle it head-on, with integrity, passion, and a commitment to making a difference. Years had passed since Ethan Carter first stepped into that small Chicago courtroom as a nervous teenager accused of hacking into the city's transportation system. Now, standing on the steps of the same courthouse, he felt like a completely different person. Dressed in a sharp black suit, his tie neatly knotted, Ethan held his head high as he greeted well-wishers and posed for photographs. Today marked the beginning of his career as a licensed attorney, a dream he had worked tirelessly to achieve. The ceremony earlier that day had been simple yet meaningful. Surrounded by family, friends, and mentors, Ethan took the oath to uphold justice and serve the public faithfully. As he repeated the words, his voice steady and clear, he couldn't help but glance at Judge Caldwell sitting in the front row. The retired judge sat tall, his posture as commanding as ever, though his eyes softened with pride as they met Ethan's. It was a moment neither of them would forget. After the ceremony, Ethan made his way outside to greet the crowd gathered there. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and strangers approached him to offer congratulations. Among the chaos, Laura stood close by, her face glowing with happiness. She hugged him tightly, whispering, "I'm so proud of you, Ethan." "Thanks, Mom," Ethan replied, hugging her back. "None of this would have happened without your support." As the crowd began to thin, Judge Caldwell approached, walking slowly but confidently despite his age. He extended his hand and Ethan shook it firmly. "Congratulations, counselor," the judge said, his tone warm and approving. "You've earned every bit of this." Ethan smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Your Honor. I wouldn't be here without your guidance." The judge waved off the compliment modestly. "Nonsense, you did the hard work, I just pointed you in the right direction." Laura stepped forward, wrapping her arms around the judge in another heartfelt hug. "We'll never be able to thank you enough," she said, her voice trembling slightly. The judge patted her shoulder awkwardly, though a faint smile played on his lips. "It was my honor," he replied simply. In the weeks that followed, Ethan dove headfirst into his new role as an attorney. He joined a nonprofit organization dedicated to reforming outdated legal practices and advocating for underprivileged communities. His focus was on cases involving technology and cybersecurity, areas where he felt he could make the biggest impact. Many of his clients were young people caught in similar situations to the one he had faced years ago, accused of crimes fueled by curiosity or ignorance rather than malice. One of Ethan's earliest cases involved a teenage girl named Mia, who had been charged with illegally accessing school records to expose unfair grading practices. When Ethan first met Mia, she reminded him so much of himself, bright, passionate, and scared. Sitting across from her in a cramped meeting room, he listened carefully as she explained her side of the story. "I didn't mean to break any rules," Mia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to show everyone what was really going on." Ethan nodded, understanding exactly how she felt. "I believe you," he told her, "and we're going to fight for you, okay?" Over the next few months, Ethan worked tirelessly on Mia's case, gathering evidence, filing motions, and preparing arguments. Just like during his own trial, he left no stone unturned, determined to ensure that justice prevailed. When the judge ultimately dismissed the charges against Mia, citing lack of intent and insufficient evidence, Ethan felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Seeing the relief on Mia's face reminded him why he had chosen this path. Meanwhile, Judge Caldwell kept tabs on Ethan's progress, often calling or visiting to check in. Though retired, the judge remained active in legal circles, attending conferences and mentoring young lawyers. He took particular pride in Ethan's achievements, seeing them as proof that the legal system could still inspire change. "You're making waves, kid," the judge remarked during one of their meetings. "People are starting to notice." Ethan laughed humbly. "I'm just doing what feels right. If I can help even one person avoid the mistakes I made, it's worth it." "That's the spirit," the judge said, nodding approvingly. "But don't forget to take care of yourself too. Burnout doesn't help anyone." Ethan promised to try, though he knew it wouldn't be easy. Balancing long hours at work with personal life was challenging, especially when so many people depended on him. Still, he found comfort in knowing he wasn't alone. Between his mom's constant encouragement and the judge's occasional advice, he felt supported in ways he never expected. As time went on, Ethan's reputation grew beyond Chicago. He became a sought-after speaker at universities and tech conferences, sharing his experiences and insights about the intersection of law and technology. His speeches often emphasized the importance of education and empathy, urging audiences to look beyond stereotypes and assumptions. "Too often, we judge people based on their worst moments," Ethan said during one keynote address. "But everyone deserves a chance to grow, to learn, and to prove themselves. That's what justice should be about. Not punishment, but opportunity." His words resonated deeply with listeners, inspiring many to rethink their perspectives. For Ethan, these moments were some of the most rewarding parts of his journey. Knowing that he could influence others to see the world differently gave him a profound sense of purpose. Despite his success, Ethan never lost sight of where he came from. He visited his old neighborhood regularly, volunteering at community centers, and mentoring kids interested in technology. On weekends, he hosted workshops teaching coding and cybersecurity basics, hoping to channel young people's curiosity into positive outlets. One Saturday afternoon, as Ethan wrapped up a session with a group of eager teenagers, one boy lingered behind. "Hey, Mr. Carter," the boy said shyly. "Do you think someone like me could really become a lawyer someday?" Ethan knelt down to meet the boy's gaze. "Absolutely," he replied with a smile. "If you work hard and stay true to yourself, anything is possible. Trust me, I know." The boy grinned, his eyes lighting up with hope. Watching him walk away, Ethan felt a familiar warmth in his chest. This was why he did what he did, not for fame or recognition, but to give others the same opportunities he had been given. By the time Ethan reached his late 20s, he had built a legacy rooted in fairness, compassion, and innovation. His work inspired reforms in how courts handled juvenile cybercrime cases, leading to more nuanced approaches that considered intent and context. Law schools began teaching his methods as examples of effective advocacy, and his name became synonymous with integrity and perseverance. Through it all, Ethan remained grounded, always remembering the lessons he learned from Judge Caldwell and the challenges he overcame as a teenager. Together, they proved that even the most unlikely relationships could spark meaningful change, and that justice, when pursued with passion and purpose, could transform lives. Ethan Carter's journey had come full circle. Years after standing nervously in a Chicago courtroom as a defendant, he now stood confidently before a crowd of supporters, having dedicated his life to reforming the very system that once threatened to define him. His story was no longer just about survival. It was about transformation, redemption, and the power of second chances. By his early 30s, Ethan had become a household name in legal circles. He wasn't just known for winning cases. He was celebrated for changing the way people thought about justice. His advocacy work extended beyond courtrooms, reaching classrooms, legislative halls, and even tech companies. He pushed for laws that balanced accountability with compassion, ensuring that young offenders weren't punished disproportionately for mistakes made out of curiosity or ignorance. One of Ethan's proudest achievements was helping draft a new policy framework for handling juvenile cybercrime cases. Under this framework, judges were encouraged to consider intent, context, and potential for rehabilitation when sentencing young defendants. Instead of focusing solely on punishment, the system aimed to provide education, mentorship, and opportunities for growth. Many credited Ethan's efforts with reducing recidivism rates among teenagers involved in digital offenses. But Ethan didn't stop there. Recognizing the importance of prevention, he launched a nonprofit organization called Code for Change. The program offered free workshops, resources, and mentorship to students interested in technology and law. By teaching kids how to use their skills responsibly, Ethan hoped to steer them away from trouble while empowering them to pursue careers in fields they loved. "Every child deserves a chance to succeed," Ethan often said during interviews. "If we can catch them before they fall, we can help them rise." His message resonated deeply, inspiring communities across the country to adopt similar initiatives. Schools invited him to speak at assemblies, parents sought his advice, and policymakers looked to him as a voice of reason in an increasingly complex world. Judge Caldwell watched Ethan's success with quiet pride. Though retired, the judge remained active in mentoring young lawyers and occasionally consulting on high-profile cases. He kept a framed photo of Ethan on his desk, a reminder of the boy who had taught him so much. "I never imagined I'd see someone like him again," the judge mused one evening, speaking to Laura during a rare visit. "He reminds me of why I became a judge in the first place." Laura smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. "You changed his life, you know. Without your guidance, I don't think he would have found his path." The judge shook his head modestly. "No, it was all him. I just gave him a push in the right direction." Their friendship had grown stronger over the years, built on mutual respect and shared values. Laura often joked that Ethan had two fathers now, one biological and one honorary. Judge Caldwell chuckled at the remark but secretly cherished the sentiment. As Ethan's career flourished, he continued to prioritize his relationships with those who mattered most. Despite his busy schedule, he made time for his mom, taking her out to dinner every week and calling her daily to check in. Laura loved hearing about his latest projects, though she sometimes worried he was working too hard. "You need to slow down, Ethan," she told him one evening as they sat together on the couch. "You've already done so much. Let someone else take the reins for a while." Ethan laughed softly. "I'll try, Mom, but there's still so much to do." She reached over and patted his hand. "Just promise me you won't forget to enjoy the ride." Her words stayed with him long after their conversation ended. For all his accomplishments, Ethan realized he hadn't taken much time to reflect on how far he'd come. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he allowed himself to feel a sense of gratitude, not just for his successes, but for the challenges that had shaped him into the person he was today. In the years that followed, Ethan's influence continued to grow. He wrote a memoir titled From Defendant to Defender, detailing his experiences and offering advice to others navigating difficult paths. The book became a bestseller, praised for its honesty and insight. It also served as a guide for countless individuals seeking hope and direction. At the same time, Ethan began exploring new avenues for impact. He partnered with tech companies to develop educational tools aimed at teaching ethics and responsibility, alongside coding skills. He lobbied for stricter regulations on cybersecurity practices, urging both private and public sectors to prioritize safety without stifling innovation. And he traveled the world, sharing his vision of a future where technology and humanity coexisted harmoniously. Through it all, Ethan remained humble, always crediting his mom, Judge Caldwell, and the lessons he learned along the way for his success. He understood that none of what he achieved was possible alone. It took a village to raise him, support him, and believe in him when he couldn't believe in himself. One sunny afternoon, Ethan returned to the courthouse where his journey began. This time he wasn't there as a defendant or even as a lawyer. He was there to deliver a speech at a ceremony honoring Judge Caldwell. The retired judge had been selected for a Lifetime Achievement Award, recognizing his decades of service and commitment to fairness. As Ethan stepped up to the podium, the audience erupted in applause. He waited patiently for the noise to subside before beginning his remarks. "When I first met Judge Caldwell," Ethan said, glancing at the judge seated in the front row, "I thought he was the toughest person I'd ever encountered. And honestly, he was. But beneath that tough exterior was someone who cared deeply about justice, not just as a concept, but as a living, breathing ideal." The crowd listened intently as Ethan recounted their unlikely partnership and the lessons he had learned. "Judge Caldwell taught me that the law isn't just about rules and punishments, it's about people, their stories, their struggles, and their potential. He reminded me that everyone deserves a chance to prove themselves no matter where they start." Turning to face the judge directly, Ethan added, "Thank you, Your Honor, for believing in me when I needed it most. Because of you, I found my purpose. And because of you, I learned that justice isn't something we enforce, it's something we create, together." Tears welled up in Judge Caldwell's eyes as the audience rose to their feet, giving him a standing ovation. For a man who had spent his life hiding emotions behind a stern facade, the moment was overwhelming but deeply meaningful.